Alright, okay. What's up, everyone? Jordan Bates here, coming to you from Pachamama community in the jungles of Costa Rica. And today I want to talk about a fun subject, the blind spots of Sam Harris. So, for a while I've been wanting to start this video series identifying some of the top blind spots of some of my favorite thinkers and teachers, intellects. So I want to start by saying that I really love Sam Harris. I've listened to a lot of hours of his podcast. I think that he is a powerful intellect, and there's a lot of good stuff to learn from Sam Harris. I listened to him a lot during my more kind of rationalist phase of my life, and now I feel that I'm in a stage that's more sort of trans-rational, you might say, or post-rational or something. So, anyway, take this with a grain of salt. This is just one ape's perspective, but I think it's useful to attempt to illuminate blind spots in our own perception and our own reality tunnels. I like receiving feedback on what I'm not seeing, and so I think this is a good thing to encourage, is generally giving feedback on blind spots and shadows. So without further ado, I think one of Sam Harris's top blind spots, as I just kind of indicated, is that he's over-attached to rationalism. He's over-attached to the intellect and the thinking, conscious, conceptual mind. The kind of global Western monoculture at this point has really placed the intellect and the thinking mind on this pedestal and cherishes the conscious intellect as the kind of pinnacle of intelligence in the universe, and thinks that we can use the rational intellect to solve the most fundamental questions of existence. My sense is that this is an illusion or a delusion. I think that the rational conscious mind is a powerful tool or scalpel for solving particular problems, and understanding the mechanics of the material universe, and using this understanding to create technology, and to solve certain material problems. But I think when it comes to the deepest, most profound mysteries and questions of existence, such as who are we, what is the ultimate truth, where did all of this come from, what is the meaning and purpose of all this, with anything, if anything, I think these questions are beyond the pay grade of the intellect, and are questions that we can really only answer by moving beyond the conceptual mind and moving into the deeper intelligences of the body and the heart and the intuition, and more like the non-linear, holistic, flowing, kind of intuitive intelligence of the field of consciousness itself, which you can begin to access when you step back from the conceptual mind through meditation or through other modalities. So, I think Sam cherishes the intellect, cherishes the rational mind to the point of blocking to some extent his connection to some of the deeper intelligences of the human organism. So that would be number one. Another blind spot, I think he's over-attached to the present scientific orthodoxy, the kind of materialist scientific story of how things are. I mean, if you look at the history of science, it's relatively short, and the major stories of science, we've seen time and time again, these stories have been dethroned. There have been many revolutionary paradigm shifts in science where we've had to throw out paradigms that were quite solidified, and many people had started to become dogmatically attached to them, but then there was some sort of hypothesis or discovery that dethroned that paradigm. So presently, I think a major blind spot of a lot of Western culture is this kind of scientism and over-attachment to the current scientific orthodoxy, and even an over-attachment to the methodology of science itself. Science is a really powerful methodology that I think can tell us a lot about the dynamics of and functioning of material reality. However, yeah, science operates on certain fundamental assumptions. For instance, the idea that matter is fundamental, the idea that there is an objective reality and that we have access to this objective reality, the idea that, the current model says everything in existence began with the Big Bang some number of billions of years ago. And a lot of people take these things as like obvious truths or self-evident somehow, but really when you really dig into these things, there's no reason really to feel this way. Actually, if you look closely at the phenomenology of experience, you notice that, and Sam actually points out that you can never get beyond consciousness. Every single thing that a human being is ever experiencing is taking place within consciousness. So it's interesting that he still leans toward supposing that matter is more fundamental than consciousness, whereas the greatest sages of all time, the sort of wisest teachers of non-duality, the wisest mystics of all time, have instead suggested that consciousness is more fundamental than matter, and that everything in this kind of world of form and world of appearances is sort of taking place within what you might call the universal mind, or the mind of God, that the most fundamental substrate of all that is something more along the lines of pure awareness or spirit or mind. And so yeah, the present scientific orthodoxy has a kind of dogmatic attachment to materialism, and it seems like Sam is overinvested in that orthodoxy because he's built up an entire career around being a scientist and claiming the kind of authority and expertise that comes with that. So there's that. Another one is that Sam is an ethical realist, I think is how he says it. He thinks that there are ethical truths, moral truths that can be discovered in reality, and that these are sort of like absolute truths that are built into reality in some way. To me, morality and ethics is another story that the human mind is telling itself and projecting onto reality. And I think when you go beyond the conceptual mind and you spend time dwelling in a space of pure consciousness beyond the stories that the mind tells, what you find is that consciousness itself is fundamentally amoral. It's kind of like Rumi saying, "Beyond right and wrong lies a meadow. I'll meet you there." In that space, when you lie down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about, or something like this. So Rumi was recognizing that there's this space that the mind creates these dualities of right and wrong, and that words themselves, simply as soon as you speak about anything, you create duality, because language functions by dividing the world up into a world of separate objects so it can be talked about. But fundamentally, the fundamental mystic realization that has underlied all of the great religions throughout history, and which has been repeated over and over again, is that the ultimate truth is that all is one, that most fundamentally there's only one thing in existence, and we are all that. We are all sort of God in disguise, playing hide and seek with itself in this kind of labyrinthine divine dance, divine game of hide and seek. And so on the most fundamental level, nothing is actually right or wrong or better or worse. It's all, truth is kind of like the sun, or the space of pure consciousness in which everything arises is kind of like the sun. It shines it indiscriminately illuminates and shines upon all things and doesn't differentiate or discriminate. It's fundamentally like a space of unconditional acceptance, unconditional love, and non-judgment, and so it's beyond any sort of moral positionality. So, to me, that's another blind spot of Sam's. Another one, which is related to what I've been talking about, is that Sam seems over-identified with the world of form in general, and this is, highly highly common in human beings. We tend to live in stories. We tend to live in projections. We tell ourselves a story about a world of separate objects and a story about a separate self moving through a world of separate objects, and this is how we create narratives and a sense of meaning and a sense of past, present, and future, and we live in these stories. And this is really beautiful. It's beautiful to be a human being and live within stories. However, there's a space beyond the stories that you can access when you, through working with plant medicines or through meditation or through other modalities, you access this space beyond the mythologizing thinking mind. There's a space beyond the stories in which you realize that this world of form, this world of appearances, is not the most fundamental reality. In a certain sense, it is one with fundamental reality, but this world of form is ever changing, ever shifting. But there's a reality beneath that, a reality that we might call pure consciousness or absolute reality, which is absolutely silent and unmoving. It's like the sky, and the world of form is like the weather, the ever-shifting kind of patterns of weather that move through the sky. They're also part of the sky, but yeah, our absolute nature is this kind of fundamental substrate of mind, and it is actually changeless and deathless and silent and unmoving, and everything in the world of form is ultimately a modification of this kind of cosmic mind or the mind of God. And so when you over-identify with the weather, it blocks you from more deeply realizing the oneness of the sky. And so it seems like, Sam's over-identification with the mythology of materialist science and with this idea of a world of separate objects blocks a deeper realization of the oneness of God, which then leads to other really beautiful kind of flowerings of a deep sense that things are always sort of right where they need to be. Whatever is right. Nothing can actually fundamentally be wrong on the deepest level. Things are in a state of perfection at all times, whether or not they seem that way in the world of appearances, and actually that you can trust life and trust God. God referring to all that is, not some man in the sky, but simply being one of our most powerful signifiers to designate divine reality, the one and only reality in which we live. It just simply points to that which is ultimately beyond words. So, that's another one. And that, I think that over-identification with the world of form and with the stories of materialist science and with a lot of other stories, Sam has quite a few positionalities. He has a lot of quite strong opinions. And I think his over-identification with these leads him to take life and himself quite seriously. I think this is kind of another blind spot of his, because it's like Alan Watts said, you suffer only because you take seriously what the gods made for fun. So there's something in laughter and lightness and levity that is really intrinsic to the fundamental frequency of nature. There's like a playfulness in nature. And somehow we're most kind of in tune with ourselves and in tune with the spirit of life when we're laughing and when we're playing like children. And I don't know what Sam is like in his personal life, but my sense of him is that it would be good for him to laugh a bit more. He seems a bit rigid in his general disposition. And finally, one last thing I could say is that as a result of taking his own positionalities and opinions very seriously, Sam tends to overvalue debate. He really likes to debate people and argue. He thinks that beliefs can be true, and so he likes to play these chess games of putting his beliefs up against others' beliefs and trying to have them bash against each other and find out who has correct beliefs. But actually, when you see beyond the stories and games of the mind, you see that no belief can actually be true, because beliefs are fundamentally a compression of reality, which is infinite and cannot be compressed down. It's like an infinite territory, and any belief is an attempt to compress reality into a map. It's like the very first line of the Tao Te Ching is the way that can be told is not the eternal way. You might also say the territory that can be mapped is not the eternal territory. So as soon as you attempt to translate reality into a belief or into a map, into a linguistic structure, into a set of symbols, you fundamentally miss the mark, because reality cannot be distilled down into these symbols. Symbols and words are useful. They can take us quite far. But it's really fundamental to notice that at best, words can be really potent metaphors and like fingers pointing at the moon of reality. And the point is to not get lost in the fingers. The point is to actually find the moon of truth. And that's why there's that classic Zen proverb, do not seek truth, only cease to cherish your opinions. So the more you cease to cherish your beliefs and your positionalities, and you surrender the positionalities of the ego, the more you tend to begin to discern and come into contact with the reality of the one pure consciousness that resides beyond the positionalities and stories and beliefs of the mind. So, and then you really cease to be so interested in debating and arguing. Instead, you start to see words as more of a fun game, and you see that they're a way of metaphorically pointing at our experiences, and you become more interested in sort of collaborative truth-seeking and simply using words to share experiences, using words to recognize that everyone's experience has valuable things and interesting things and truthful things in it. And so you just become more interested in using words to share and collaborate and discover truth together, rather than trying to egotistically win in a fight of clashing your beliefs against one another's. Yes, and one final blind spot of Sam Harris's that I forgot to mention is that he is classically known as a new atheist. He's quite anti-religion. He rightfully discerns some of the failure modes of religions historically. He sees that a lot of, historically there's a pattern where humans mistake the map for the territory, and this is common in religions. Different groups of humans get the idea that their religious map or religious story is the correct one, even though all of these stories are pointing at the same moon of truth, and they decide they want to kill the other humans who have the wrong story or the different map. But in wanting to get rid of religion, I think Sam is fundamentally has a tendency to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. He has a tendency to strawman religion and to simply just say, yeah, this has just been a disastrous kind of failure of the human intellect, when really there's a lot more in religion that is highly useful. Jordan Peterson and Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung have taken elaborate, deep looks at the archetypal stories within religious mythologies and shown how these contain highly useful archetypal blueprints of different aspects of human life. So there's a lot of wisdom encoded in religion. There's a communal aspect to religion. It acts as a kind of binding agent of communities that can be highly useful. And within religion also contains the kind of seeds of religion, or some of the fundamental elements of religion that we've kind of forgotten about are mysticism and animism and shamanism and magic and ritual and ceremony. And without going into too much detail, one can say that a lot of the most precious aspects of life are found within these kind of core elements of religion. It's really just when humans attempt to take the power and wisdom and truth of religion and encode it as a dogmatic story and then say, we have the right story and you have the wrong story. That's kind of when things go haywire. But the mystical core of religion is the sort of perennial philosophy pointed to by Aldous Huxley. It's like the great mystical oneness that's been perceived by all the great seers and sages of history, and then the techniques of shamanism and magic, ritual, ceremony. These are all highly valuable for different reasons. The animistic realization of the world as kind of a living, breathing, intelligent process rather than like a dead, random, chaotic, indifferent automaton. These are all sort of highly important, precious dimensions of human life that contribute to a deep sense of divinity, profundity, meaning, enchantment of the world. So, yeah, the new atheists have this tendency to want to get rid of religion, but in doing so, they tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's one final blind spot of Mr. Sam Harris. So, yeah, those I would say are some of what I notice as the blind spots of Sam Harris. Again, this is the sense or perspective of one ape on the Earth planet, so take it with a grain of salt, but I thought it might be useful to elucidate what I see there. So thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, hit the little notification bell so you're notified when I make more videos, and yeah, have a lovely, peaceful, beautiful existence. Much love to you.